A low growl echoed through the jungle clearing as the predator stalked forward, muscles taut beneath its scaled hide, serrated claws crunching over moss and bone. It was built for fear, 2 meters tall, 4-pronged mandibles twitching, slit pupils narrowing on its target. But what it saw made it pause. The cub was smiling. It sat cross-legged on a rock, hands clutching a rusted tin mug, steam curling from whatever crude concoction bubbled inside. Around its feet were scattered sticks, feathers, and what looked like an alien teddy bear made of bundled vines. The human cub, small, wild-haired, and wearing an oversized survival vest, looked up without a flicker of fear. "You're not gonna eat me, are you?" the child asked, voice chipper. The predator, designated KRYTH Class Talon Prime, hunter of the 12th brood, scourge of the eastern cluster, halted mid-step. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. It had come here expecting resistance. Panic. Screams. Not conversation. Because that would be pretty rude, the human cub added, sipping noisily from the mug. The predator hissed low and circled the clearing, trying to recalibrate. The prey was alone. No guards. No weapons. The ship crash had been reported 12 rotation cycles ago, but by now any competent species would have recovered the young. Clearly, humanity wasn't as advanced as the High Command feared. Still, something didn't add up. A lone human child surviving this deep in Jungle Sector 9A? Among acid-fanged nether snakes and camouflaged raptor beasts. Without dying? "Are you going to keep staring, or are you gonna sit?" the cub said, patting the mossy stone beside them. "It's tea. Kind of. I boiled the leaves 3 times. Less bitter that way." The predator blinked. This was a trap. It had to be. The predator's real name, at least in its language, was a guttural snarl only ultrasonic echolocators could pronounce. It translated loosely to whispers in flesh, a badge of honor among the huntborn. Talon Prime was bred not just for war but for dominance. It had taken down pack leaders twice its size, feasted on warlords, and eviscerated an armored hover beast on Rigel 6. And yet now it was sitting on a rock, sipping scalding bark water beside a creature barely waist-high to it. "Name's Junie," the cub chirped, tossing a pebble toward a patch of glowing mushrooms. "My dad's a terraformer. Or was. I dunno if he made it after the crash. The beacon broke. I tried to fix it, but—" Junie trailed off and stared up at the stars barely visible through the dense canopy. Her voice didn't waver, but the predator caught the drop in tone. An emotion it didn't fully understand. Loss? It should have walked away. The command would not approve of this detour. Cub or not, humans were potential threats. But curiosity itched beneath its armored skin. "Do all humans talk this much?" it finally asked. Junie beamed. "Only the interesting ones." The predator kept watch that night. Junie had curled into a hammock of vine and cloth, snoring gently, while the jungle whispered its 1,000 threats. KRITH sat atop a tree branch, still as a statue, eyes scanning for movement. Something about the girl gnawed at it. She was feral, yes, but adaptable. Improvising traps, gathering food, even shaping stone tools like instinct. Her makeshift shelter was reinforced with broken ship plating. The fire pit had been dug with wind direction in mind. This wasn't random survival. It was calculated, practiced. She was no ordinary cub. The command's briefings had mentioned it before. Humans are dangerous because they learn. Fast. Unreasonably fast. Even their young. KRYTH glanced down. The cub had stolen its blade. It blinked once. Junie was using the plasma dagger, currently deactivated, as a spoon to stir her tea. By the 3rd day, KRYTH had stopped pretending it wasn't interested. It no longer perched above but sat beside her. Not always communicating. Not always understanding. But watching. Junie showed it how to twist jungle vines into cord. KRYTH taught her how to tune her hearing to distant footfalls. She explained cloud signs. It showed her how to identify predator nests from the smell of their excrement. She taught it to whistle, It demonstrated how to sharpen a rock into a monomolecular edge. They were learning from each other. Galactic found that strange. It had been designed to dominate, not to nurture. Its kind raised hatchlings in blood trials, not hammocks. But every time it considered leaving, the cub would do something, like build a shelter from 3 trees and a tarp using only her elbows and her teeth, and Galactic would pause. "You're not as scary as you look," Junie said once, while carving a stick. Galactic tilted its head. "You should be afraid." "Why?" It had no answer. Trouble came on the 7th night. A hunting party. Not one of Galactic's kind, but something worse, scavengers. Bipedal, wiry, with metal masks and stun bows. Known for snatching survivors from crash sites to sell as off-world specimens. Galactic saw the glint of optics from a distance, 4 figures silent fast. Junie was roasting fungi when the predator dropped beside her, whispering one word. "Run!" To its surprise, she didn't ask questions. She grabbed her pouch and vanished into the trees, just as the first bolt seared through their old shelter. Galactic turned, cloak unfurling, blade drawn. It didn't hesitate. The first scavenger didn't even scream. But there were more. Too many. Galactic took out 2 in the trees and another in the brush, but not before the alarm beacon activated. A flare of red plasma shot skyward. Now the entire sector would know a human cub was alive here. And that meant the worst would come. Collectors. Organ traders. Even, perhaps, command. Galactic found Junie curled beneath an overhang of rock. She was panting but alert. "They'll come now," it said. She looked up, face smeared with mud, eyes sharp. "Then we prepare." The predator blinked. That wasn't prey speak. That was war speak. By nightfall, they'd built a new shelter further uphill, camouflaged with thermospike moss. Galactic taught Junie how to rig pressure mines from leftover ship wiring. She added spice berries to their campfire stew. It was wrong. But it felt right. Galactic caught itself watching her sleep again. Not as a scout. Not as a threat. But as something else. Something it hadn't thought itself capable of. It remembered a time long ago, as a hatchling, reaching for warmth during a storm and finding nothing but cold steel. The cub stirred and mumbled, half asleep. "Night, big guy." Galactic lowered its blade. "Night, little one." Junie tightened the sling on her shoulder and glanced up the ridge. "How long do we have?" Galactic didn't answer right away. The wind had shifted. It smelled like grease, ozone, and synthetic polymers, collector-grade armor. These weren't amateur scavengers anymore. 2 days. Maybe less. Junie frowned. "We need traps. Big ones." The predator's mandibles clicked once. "We'll need to teach you how to kill." Junie hesitated. Then nodded. There was no fear in her eyes. Only focus. The next sunrise was spent in silence. Galactic moved like a wraith through the trees, gathering thornvine sap and shardstone. Junie followed, her feet light despite the oversized boots. She understood now that their situation had changed. No longer just about surviving. Now it was about defending. The jungle, once her secret playground, had become a war zone. She marked branches for snare lines while Galactic buried charged packs under false trails. The traps were crude, but Galactic respected her instincts. She used gravity, slope, and even native insect swarms as weapons. "This one'll drop a log full of hornbeetles right into their face." She grinned. Galactic watched her with a strange twist in its gut. There was pride. But also unease. She was adapting too quickly. Too much like a Talon. Too much like him. That night, as they sat beside a flame that burned cold blue, so it wouldn't show on thermal scans, Junie looked up from her stew. "Why didn't you just leave? After you found me?" Galactic paused mid-sharpening its blade. The answer came slower than expected. "I don't know." "Was it pity?" "No," it said flatly. "We don't pity." "Then what?" There was a long silence. Kryth looked at her across the fire, seeing her not as a cub or curiosity anymore, but as a warrior in becoming. Something ancient, it finally said. Something I was never taught. Junie didn't press. But the fire cracked louder after that. The first attack came at midday. They heard the pulse beacons first, slow drumming vibrations through the roots. Kryth's mandibles flared. Their sweeping was seismic mapping. Junie dropped behind a root wall and pulled up her slingshot. Kryth blinked. That is not a weapon. It will be. She loaded a shardstone slug. Kryth almost laughed, then saw her calculate the bounce, the drop, the angle. And she fired. The slug pinged off 2 rocks and hit the lead scout's lens with a loud crack. It didn't kill him, but it blinded him. The talon lunged. It was a clean takedown. 2 claws to the chest, a twist of the blade, and the body vanished into the brush. Junie ducked as plasma bolts hissed past. How many? 6. No, 8. 1 drone. Junie pulled a stone from her pouch. EMP spark? Kryth nodded. Junie threw it high. The jungle lit up like a blue supernova. The drone fell, twitching. The others shouted in their own tongue, panicked, disoriented. That's when the log trap snapped. 3 hornbeetle-covered warriors screamed and ran. 1 fell over a buried pressure mine. Silence returned. Junie leaned against a tree, breathing hard. Kryth crouched beside her, scanning the perimeter. They weren't elite, it said. Scouts. More will come. Yes. Junie pulled a tooth from the corpse's gear and added it to her string of trophies. Kryth raised a brow ridge. What? You guys do it. You are learning too well. She grinned. Then teach me more. The next lesson came in the form of fear. Junie awoke in the night, heart pounding. She'd heard it, the shriek. Deep. Distant. Too low for most humans. But not her. Kryth was already up. That was no collector. Then what? The predator didn't answer. But its hand drifted to its chest, where a long-healed scar pulsed under armor. Junie didn't need an answer. She could see it in his stance. This was personal. By morning, the air was different. Heavy. Pressurized. Like the planet itself knew something was coming. Junie had reset the traps. Kryth added microsplinters laced with neurotoxin to the spear tips. As they worked, Junie asked softly, Who is it? The predator said nothing for a while. Then, Galactic. Your kind? Worse. Kryth knelt beside her, drawing a crude sketch in the dirt. A tall creature. Heavily armored. 4 arms. With a staff crackling with electricity. He takes trophies too. But not teeth. He takes the hearts. Junie swallowed. You fought him? Kryth nodded. Lost? Barely lived. She stared at the drawing. Then stood. Let's change that. The next 12 hours were a blur. They built traps designed not to kill, but to isolate. Confuse. Break apart units. Kryth dug narrow channels lined with powdered spice vine, blinding when inhaled. Junie set mirrors to bounce solar beams into sensors. They built dummies of themselves out of sticks and armor scraps. It wouldn't stop Galactic. But it might slow him. And slow was all they needed. Dusk came. And with it silence. No birds. No insects. No wind. Even the jungle held its breath. Junie checked her slingshot. Kryth gave her a throwing spike. For last resort, it said. Junie tucked it into her boot. They crouched behind the fallen ship's frame, now camouflaged with brush and shadows. Then came the footsteps. Heavy. Measured. Confident. Galactic entered the clearing. He was even larger than the drawing. Armor fused to flesh. Scarred from a dozen wars. His eyes glowed with some unknown tech. The staff on his back hummed like a power core about to rupture. He paused at the log trap. didn't step in. Instead, he looked up. Right where Junie's mirror sat. He fired. The jungle exploded in light and flame. Junie was thrown backwards. Kryth roared and lunged, but Growlithe spun, caught him midair, and slammed him to the dirt. Junie crawled, ears ringing. She saw Kryth rise, slowly. Wounded. Growlithe circled, staff drawn. He laughed. A sound like metal grinding over bone. Junie did the only thing she could. She ran straight into the fight. And screamed. Hey! Ugly! You missed your chance to be scary 10 minutes ago. Growlithe turned. Confused. Too slow. Because Junie had already loaded her slingshot. Shardstone slug. Full force. She aimed, not at his face, but at the joint behind his knee. Crack. Growlithe staggered. Kryth moved like lightning. This time, the blade went deep. Growlithe roared, backhanded Kryth into a tree, but the damage was done. His leg gave out. Junie sprinted, scooped up a dropped pulse grenade, and yanked the pin. She didn't throw it. She jammed it into the hole in his armor and rolled clear. The jungle shook. Growlithe collapsed. Smoke rising from his chest. Junie crawled toward Kryth. He was bleeding. Bad. Too much. She tore her vest, wrapped his shoulder, pressed down. Don't you dare die. Kryth blinked, one eye barely open. You, yelled at Growlithe. Yeah. He was a jerk. Kryth made a sound. Almost a chuckle. You are insane, he rasped. Maybe. But I'm also not done. She stayed with him through the night. As the fire crackled and the stars returned, Junie sat beside the great predator who once stalked her. She thought of how far they'd come. From strangers. To allies. To something more. Family? Maybe. She looked at the rising sun and whispered, I'm not afraid anymore. Kryth stirred. Good. Because now we have to plan how to get off this rock. He nodded slowly. And teach others what we learned. Junie grinned. Deal. The air reeked of scorched metal and blood. Morning light filtered through the canopy, weak and gray, casting a muted glow over the broken clearing. Growlithe's ruined body still smoked where it lay, his staff split, armor cracked, the core pulsing faintly like a dying heartbeat. Junie didn't look at the body again. She was focused entirely on the predator lying beside her. Stay with me, she whispered, voice tight. Kryth's breathing was shallow. One of his arms hung limp, the other pressed tight over his abdomen where plasma had scored a deep wound. This isn't how you die, she said. Not after everything. Not now. Kryth turned one eye toward her, the usual amber glow dim. You are remarkably loud. Junie laughed. It came out as a choked sob. You always say that. And it's always true. His mandibles clicked weakly. Junie reached into her pouch and pulled out the last synth gel pack, something she'd stolen off a dead scavenger 2 days ago. This might hurt. I do not fear pain. You will after this. She jammed the injector into his side and pressed. Kryth's body spasmed. Then he fell still. It took a full hour before Kryth sat up. Another before he could walk. By then, Junie had already scavenged what she could from Growlithe's corpse, a half-charged energy cell, a shard of his broken staff, and a thin strip of memory weave, valuable, encrypted tech embedded into his chest armor. We can use this, she said, holding it up. It'll have maps. Frequencies. Maybe even exfil coordinates. Kryth studied her silently. Then nodded once. Junie caught something in that gaze. Not approval. Not even pride. Something closer to awe. Their jungle haven was no longer safe. Too much blood in the dirt. Too many eyes would come looking once Growlithe failed to report. Junie helped Kryth climb higher into the mountain ridge, past jagged cliffs and obsidian ravines. The climb was brutal, especially with Kryth still limping, but neither of them complained. somewhere beyond the peaks, the remains of a collector relay station still stood. If they could reach it, and if they could reactivate it, they might send a signal strong enough to reach human or Talon territory. That was the plan. But both knew the jungle had other intentions. By the third ridge, KRYTH collapsed again. Junie dragged him beneath a stone outcropping and tried to hide the tremble in her hands. "You're not dying. I swear I'll scream you back to life if I have to." KRYTH exhaled, chest rattling. "You are not standard issue," she snorted. "Neither are you." Then her face turned serious. "Why did Growlithe matter so much?" KRYTH's eyes didn't open. But he spoke. "He was my first rival. Before the culling pits. Before I earned my blades." Junie sat beside him. "He nearly took my heart once. I promised that if we met again, only one of us would walk away." She looked out over the cliffs. "Well, promise kept." KRYTH didn't respond. But his fingers twitched. She slipped her hand into his. And squeezed. That night, KRYTH dreamed. Of Talon birth pits. Of screaming hatchlings fighting for dominance. Of blood rights. Of commanders who taught them that affection was weakness, that empathy was a flaw. But the dream shifted. He saw Junie, barefoot in jungle mud, laughing as she stirred stew, her face lit by firelight. He saw her standing between him and Growlithe. He saw her saving him. Waking came slowly. And with it, a new feeling. Unfamiliar. Warm. He didn't know the human word for it. But he knew it had changed him. They reached the relay tower on the fourth day. It was half buried in ash and vines, leaning like a broken tooth. The jungle had tried to reclaim it, but the signal dish still blinked faintly beneath the grime. "Think it works?" Junie asked, brushing moss from a console. "We'll find out," KRYTH murmured, already slicing open the access panel with his claw. Junie scanned the data while he reconnected the power lines. She found the transmission code buried deep, a Talon emergency beacon. "You can send a message to your kind," she said. KRYTH paused. Then turned to her. "We can send one to yours." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that? I owe you my life." Junie looked down. Then quietly. "If they come and they see you, they will see who you are first." That gave her pause. Then she nodded. "Okay. Let's do it together." The relay hummed to life. KRYTH tapped in the coordinates. Junie encrypted a short burst ping in both Terran Standard and Talon script. Coordinates. Medical status. Alive. Requesting evac. Requesting peace. Requesting trust. She hesitated on that last word. But left it in. KRYTH leaned over and pressed the final key. The signal launched. Their message now belonged to the stars. They didn't speak much after that. What could they say? They had survived ambushes. Outwitted warlords. Built traps, saved each other, bled for each other. They had become something beyond predator and prey. Now, they could only wait. KRYTH spent his hours sharpening blades, not because he needed to, but because it kept his hands busy. Junie sat nearby, sketching strange birds in a torn corner of ration packaging. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked once. KRYTH didn't answer. But in his chest, the hope burned too bright to ignore. The ship came on the fifth night. They heard it first, low rumble, like thunder split by machine. KRYTH rose to his feet, armor tight. Junie bolted upright, heart pounding. A single drop ship, bearing no insignia, hovered above the clearing near the old relay. It didn't fire. Didn't deploy troops. It simply landed. The hatch hissed open. And from the ramp emerged two figures. One wore Terran rescue insignia. The other wore Talon armor. KRYTH stepped forward, shoulders squared. Junie followed. "Identify," the Terran called. KRYTH raised his head. "Talon Prime. KRYTH class. Traveling with human juvenile. Survivor class." The Talon officer stared. You expect us to believe you didn't harm her? Junie stepped forward, chin high. He saved me. More than once. We protected each other. The human rescue officer eyed her. And you're sure? Junie nodded. I'm sure. It took hours of scanning, questioning, medical checks, decontamination fields. But they were let on board. They were taken to separate bays, standard protocol, but Junie and KRYTH locked eyes before the doors closed. She mouthed the words, "Don't disappear." He didn't. 2 days later, the decision was made. Not by one government. Not by one fleet. But by both. Junie's story, uploaded to the Cornet, had gone viral among the diplomatic circles. A cub befriending a predator. A Talon warrior choosing to protect instead of kill. Anomaly. Miracle. Hope. Whatever the word, it was enough. KRYTH was offered exile in neutral space. Not imprisonment. Not execution. Junie was offered transport back to Earth. They both declined. When the new colony ship launched 3 months later, deep into uncharted territory, 2 names were listed as official guides. Junie Kale. And KRYTH, Talon Prime. They wore matching badges on their uniforms. Co-survivors. Co-commanders. On the bridge of the ship, KRYTH stood watching the stars. Junie leaned beside him, arms crossed. You sure we're not just weird? Very sure. How do you know? Because if this, he gestured around the bridge, is weird, I don't want to be normal. Junie laughed. Then, softer. So, what now? KRYTH turned toward the void. We build something better. She looked up at him. And smiled. Together? He nodded once. Always. The stars were quieter here. Not silent. Space was never silent, but peaceful. No patrol sirens. No orbital mines. Just the steady hum of the Turn Resolute, humanity's newest deep space colony vessel, gliding across the edge of uncharted territory. On Deck 5, beneath the observation dome, Junie sat cross-legged in the same patched vest she'd worn in the jungle, now reinforced with carbon mesh and a shiny new mission patch, First Contact Liaison. A small honor, the diplomat said. A massive shadow fell across her shoulder. You're early, she said, not turning. I am never late, KRYTH rumbled behind her. She smirked. You were once. Remember? When I nearly stepped into that dart trap? You were supposed to listen. You were supposed to explain how it worked. KRYTH let out a low, amused growl, the Talon equivalent of a chuckle. He settled beside her, the curved armor of his legs brushing the floor with metallic weight. Above them, the stars shimmered like a sea of cold fire. For a moment neither spoke. Then Junie said quietly, They're watching us, you know. KRYTH nodded once. Always. Indeed, somewhere in orbit, a dozen eyes from Terran Command and Talon High clans were tracking their biosigns, conversations, and movement patterns. The coexistence initiative was still under scrutiny. Some called it dangerous. Others called it fake. But none could deny what had happened in the jungle. And none could ignore the results since. No war. No raids. No new dead. Just progress. 6 months had passed since the relay signal. 3 since they'd boarded the Turn Resolute as joint civilian specialists. And just 1 since Junie gave her first speech on behalf of the Terran Talon Accord. She'd stood in front of a packed command forum, her voice shaking, palms sweating, and told the story of how she met a creature designed to kill her, and taught it how to make soup. She said nothing about war. She said everything about choice. Afterward, KRYTH had stood beside her as she left the stage. The image had gone viral. 2 silhouettes. One clawed, one human. Standing equal. But not everyone believed. Some corners of the Terran net called it propaganda. Others mocked her, Predator's pet, they wrote in the forums, or the jungle girl with Stockholm Syndrome. Junie never responded. But KRYTH did. He left a single line on an open forum, tagged with his code. Stronger is not who strikes first. Stronger is who refuses to. That shut them up. Mostly. The ship's colony mission kept them busy. They weren't soldiers anymore, but they weren't passengers either. Junie trained new crews in survival tactics. KRYTH taught conflict analysis, trap deconstruction, and threat modeling. He had an entire simulator deck for it now. And once a week they sparred. It was a favorite among the crew, watching the Predator and the girl dance around each other, steel and strategy in motion. Junie was faster. KRYTH hit harder. May there ever won. That wasn't the point. They weren't fighting each other anymore. They were teaching everyone how not to. It was Junie who first found the derelict signal. 2 weeks into Sector 19B's sweep, she picked up the faint burst of code while decoding a weather satellite's magnetosphere relay. It was garbled, buried under solar interference, but there was no mistaking the structure. A human emergency beacon. KRYTH leaned over her console, pupils narrowing. Too far for a modern drop team. Old colony class? Junie agreed. Generation ship? Maybe one of the lost ones? KRYTH tapped his claw against the screen. Coordinates. No warning signals. No automated reply. It's drifting. Junie turned to him. You want to go? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They launched the Scoutwing Peregrine by midnight cycle. Command hadn't approved the deviation, but they didn't stop it either. Everyone wanted to know what would happen when the first Tarantelone team responded to a real-world distress call. There was no ceremony. Just 2 survivors walking back into the unknown. Together. The ship was old. Very old. Its hull was covered in ion scarring and micrometeorite pocks. It spun lazily near a dead star, its thrusters long cold. KRYTH sliced through the external lock. Junie pulled her mask tight. Inside, it was silence and dust. Junie swept her torch across the walls. Cryopods. Dozens. Most were cracked. Some empty. But in the last row, they found life. One pod blinked blue. A heartbeat inside. Junie checked the diagnostics. Male. 10 years old. Vital signs are stable. KRYTH stared at the frost-covered glass. The child stirred inside. They brought him aboard. Monitored his vitals. Watched him breathe. Junie sat at the foot of the medbed, remembering another jungle. Another child. Alone, against everything. She didn't speak for a long time. KRYTH watched her from the doorway. Finally, she whispered. He'll be scared. He will adapt. Because we did? KRYTH tilted his head. No. Because we'll help him. She looked back at him. And smiled. Word spread fast. A new survivor. A second chance. Human and Talon teams both volunteered to help. Doctors. Counselors. Translators. Even the diplomats came. But the child only responded to 2 people. The girl who had once survived a jungle. And the Predator who taught her how. They taught him how to cook stew. How to braid rope. How to hold a blade not to kill, but to understand it. They never called themselves guardians. They never had to. He just started calling them his own. A year passed. The Turn Resolute reached its colony world, a lush blue-green moon named Ely Sarah. KRYTH led the first scouting party. Junie took the first soil sample. The child, now strong, loud, and perpetually barefoot, named the first creek. Junie's River. After nearly falling into it 3 times. They built homes. Real homes. Not tents. Not drop modules. Places with kitchens and wooden tables and stories carved into the walls. No one asked what species they were building for. Because the answer was obvious. Both. At the dedication ceremony for the Central Plaza, the colony commander asked Junie and KRYTH to speak. Junie stepped forward first. Her voice didn't shake anymore. She said, I was just a cub when I met him. And he was supposed to eat me. That's how our kinds were taught. But instead, he sat down beside me. And everything changed. Then Kryth stepped up. His words were slow. Careful. Peace is not instinct. It is not easy. It is a choice. One you must make. Every cycle. Every morning. Even when your claws want otherwise. There was silence. Then applause. From both sides. Later, as the stars rose over Elisara's hills, Junie and Kryth sat together beneath a stone arch, the young boy curled up asleep between them. She looked at her old friend. Still think I talk too much? Yes. A pause. But now, I understand why. She nudged his arm. Thanks. For what? For not eating me. He rumbled with amusement. You're welcome. Another pause. Then softer. Thank you, for saving me. She looked over. And saw not the predator who once stalked her, but the protector who stood by her. And the future they were building. One child. One word. One peaceful act at a time.